Welcome to the YourTown television program. My name is Jeff Kline. I'm your host for this segment, sponsored by the Naval Postgraduate School Foundation. And we have a series of segments that we'd like to present now about married couples or spouses at the Naval Postgraduate School, both as students and as faculty. And to start off our segments, we welcome Dr. Juanita and Dr. Rene Rendon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
We're very fortunate to have married couples at MPS with their advanced degrees, both the students' benefit and, of course, our faculty research benefits. And we're going to talk a little bit about your specialties within our business school and what you do and the contributions you make. But first, we got to get to know a little bit about how you met. So I noticed that both of you went to Angelo State University in Texas. Mm-hmm. Is that where you met as students, or did you meet before then?
No, we met at Angelo State University in West Texas.
Were you had both degree programs, or what you
economics. We actually met in an economics class.
Ah,
right. So
yes.
we took. We're both in the business school, getting our business degrees, and we did meet in the economics class. So you can see that our relationship was founded on the theories of supply and demand,
or cost effectiveness. I mean, there was all kinds of things, one way or the other. Wow, that's fantastic. I mean, a love story by economics class. Very few people would think of that. That's great. So after graduation, though, Rene, you went to the Air Force. Now, were you in an Air Force program at Angelo State?
Yes, I graduated, or I went through the ROTC program at Angelo State University. That was one of the reasons why I picked it. I'm originally from San Antonio, so is Juanita, from that area.
But you didn't know each other in San Antonio?
No,
No.
Okay, So I picked Angelo State because they had a good business program and a good ROTC program. So I was in the ROTC program, and when I graduated, I received my commission.
Was it the cadet uniform that attracted?
Yes, it was.
It was? Okay, well, that's great. So what did you do in the Air Force initially?
Well, initially, I was a missile launch officer, so that's how I ended up getting a master's from the University of North Dakota. I was stationed in North Dakota as a missile operations officer. But the majority of my time was as a contracting officer. The Air Force likes to have their contracting officers have an operational tour.
To experience first. So did you know that in advance before you went missiles?
Yes.
Now,
yes.
we should try to explain to our audience what a missile control officer is. You spend a lot of time underground, is that right?
That's right. So in the Missile Launch Control Center with access to the launch control keys and so forth. So there's a lot of movies about that. But so my initial tour was missiles. But I did transition into contracting shortly thereafter. My first contracting officer job was on the Peacekeeper ICBM program.
Okay.
So I worked on the Peacekeeper program.
So you actually had the missile experience, and that allowed you to
Exactly.
move that into the contracting experience
Exactly.
as well.
And then I spent the rest of my 22 years in working major systems contracting, stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I worked on the F-22 program. I worked in the Air Force One, the Maverick missile. I also worked at the Space and Missile Systems Center at Los Angeles, where I worked on some space systems and satellite programs. And I was a contracting squadron commander at a pilot training base in West Texas.
So, but initially, now you were married before you were commissioned, or during, or right after you were commissioned?
It was
or
about a year after I was in the Air Force.
Okay. So you didn't immediately go to North Dakota with it?
No.
That was a wise woman.
She showed up about a year after.
Okay.
It took a year in North Dakota by myself to realize I needed to come home.
That's exactly right.
That's right.
That's fantastic. And while he was doing his duty in North Dakota, you were studying, is that right, or what were you doing?
Actually, I was teaching.
Oh, you were teaching.
Yes.
Wonderful. What did you teach then?
I taught business courses in the high school level in South Texas area.
Okay,
For
great.
about 2 years. So.
And then you joined him in North Dakota, or
yes, we got married in Texas.
Right?
We got married in San Antonio, Texas. That's
Okay.
our hometown, and then I took her away from all of that and took her to North Dakota.
North Dakota.
And then Wright-Pat.
And then from there it was Cheyenne, Wyoming. So we spent some time. That's on the Peacekeeper program.
Wow. Okay.
So, in Cheyenne, and then Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and then another assignment in San Antonio at Randolph Air Force Base, and then Los Angeles Air Force, or
Del Rio.
Del Rio, Texas.
Yeah, Del Rio, Texas. Yeah.
And then Los Angeles.
Well, now there's an Air Force culture, and I understand that. So moving from Texas to one Air Force culture in the Midwest is not that big deal.
Right.
But the climate is certainly different.
Definitely.
So
Yes.
how did you adjust to that?
It was
the
an
Montana
adjustment.
winters
Right.
Right.
North Dakota.
or North Dakota
Yes.
winters. Yeah.
You learn to acclimate
Yeah.
to the weather,
warm.
dress warmly, long
long
johns,
johns.
a lot of long johns.
Great.
But yeah.
Well, you became also a certified public accountant after your
Yes.
graduation. you also became a CFE. So what exactly is that?
That's a certified fraud examiner.
Oh, a fraud examiner.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we're going to get into this because that's sort of your specialty now
Yes,
here,
and
right?
procurement fraud. I conduct research in that area, internal controls, procurement fraud. So the ACFE, Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, they're based out of Austin, Texas. And so they confer the ACFE credential.
Now, did after you got your certified public accountant, is that required to get a CFE, or are they
No.
mutually exclusive, or
They're-
are they?
they're separate.
They're
Right,
separate and
right,
independent.
right.
Well, CPA is a fairly lucrative type certification to have. What drew you to academics instead of that profession?
Well, I started out teaching, like I mentioned earlier, and I actually worked for the IRS for over
okay.
17 years. While
That's
we
what
were
got you
moving
interested in
around.
the fraud?
Yes, exactly. And so as a professional accountant in the service, IRS, I pursued my CPA certification.
And IRS allowed you to move around your
Yes,
job?
it
and
worked out
position?
really well for my career because every time he moved, I was able to move with him.
That's great.
IRS has offices all over the place. So.
Sure. Oh, yes.
As we all know.
As we all know, right.
Well, that's exactly
So-
right.
Every time the Air Force moved me, the IRS would move her to the same place where I was being stationed at. So she was
Worked
able
out
to
well.
complete her career as I was completing my career.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's a great story on the IRS for
Yes.
crying out loud to allow that to happen.
A positive thing,
There was
right.
probably self-interest in their part as well to retain the talent that they had acquired. Now, so what point did you all decide to get your doctorates? What made you and motivated you to do that?
Well, when we were stationed in Los Angeles Air Force Base, I started taking an interest. I was a director of contracting for one of the space programs down there.
Can you tell us
And,
which one?
I was at Space Infrared Systems
Okay.
Surveillance. It's a satellite
So it's
system.
a surveillance system.
Right. So I was director of contracting, overseeing those programs, and I worked very closely with our SES in charge of contracting, and I always had an interest in how do you assess an organization's contracting processes? How do you assess the capability of an organization in terms of contract process capability?
So explain that a little bit. You assess an organization based on
Right.
how they do their contracting?
Right, based
Okay.
on their procedures, based on processes,
Okay.
based on process enablers. Are processes documented and mandated? Are there effective internal controls? Is there management support for the various activities within the contracting
Oh, I
process?
see. Okay.
Issuing the RFP, evaluating proposals, administering a contract. So throughout my entire career being in the Air Force and contracting, I was always in charge of how strong is my organization in terms of contracting process capability. So when I started my doctorate degree and I had to select a dissertation topic, I had support from the Air Force Base there. They wanted to know, hey, how can you help us assess our process capability for our organizational contracting processes?
Wonderful. But what motivated you to get that PhD to begin with?
I always had an interest in teaching. You know,
Okay.
being a contracting officer, we're always educating other people on contracting.
Sure.
On either our commanders or superiors or PEOs, program executive officers. So I was always in the educational mode, and that's what sparked my interest to pursue the doctorate degree and then transition into academia.
Now, as you were doing your contracting work, did they realize you were married to a fraud examiner?
I'm sure they did.
This is a good thing. I can
right.
see this right now.
Right.
Very successful and contracting that was very adhered to, I'm sure. Well, what motivated you then to get your doctorate?
Similar reasons, except mine was in procurement fraud and internal controls. As a revenue agent in the IRS, I conducted some fraud investigations and found that many companies, even though they have internal control policy, they're not following their own policy, similar to the government now that I've done research in that area.
So they write the instructions out, but they don't
follow
it.
them.
Yeah, that sounds like the Navy's
Exactly.
doctrine.
So unfortunately that's
it's a strength in warfare. It's not necessarily when you're actually doing taxes and that sort of thing.
So that the issue of policy versus practice.
So
comes up.
you work mainly in industry or with industry,
Industry,
when it came
yes.
to that? Okay.
Yes.
And that got your interest, and that's why you decided, and that's what you did your dissertation on?
Yeah, actually in the support of the government purchase program, card program.
So that's where
So-
government purchase program is where we can buy up to a certain limit, we can use a
Right,
credit
with a
card
credit
to buy with or without competition. Without competition,
Right,
right?
without
Right.
competition.
Right. So
The threshold is $3,500, I believe.
$3,500.
now.
Yeah.
so you can do that, but why would that be an area of fraud? Or maybe I
Well,
misunderstand.
because sometimes the cardholders will purchase items that are not for government use.
Oh, I see.
So,
Okay.
yes,
Well, now how do you track that? Let's get on to that process. How do you analyze a set of records and say there's potentially fraud going on here?
there are many aspects. In tax fraud, you look at the whole picture, not just the records, but how are the people living? You know what
Right.
they're living.
Are they
If-
living beyond what
exactly
looks like their means?
what their
Right.
means, exactly things like that.
Okay.
So,
So they're
yes.
receiving income that's not necessarily being claimed
Exactly.
in the area. Okay.
Right.
Great. Well, so you went from there, and now how did we capture you for MPS? How did we get that lucky to have you come here?
Right. Well, when I was ready to complete my career in the Air Force and I wanted to get into academia, I actually started teaching part-time down at Los Angeles.
Oh,
I
great.
was
So you
teaching-
got warmed up, so to speak.
Exactly. I
Right.
taught in the master's program at Keller Graduate School of Management. I also taught for the University of California, UCLA's government contracts program. And when I decided to retire and go full-time in academia, I had sent my resumes out to the schools that provide degree programs in contracting, and the Naval Postgraduate School is right up there at the top.
Oh, well, with your experience, I can understand that. And we'll talk about why that's important for our business school in a second. But then you became a lecturer at MPS as well, is that
Yes.
right? So that's why we got sort of, were both of you interviewed separately when that happened, or?
Yes, he
Okay.
started with NPS before I did.
Oh,
I
you
came
did,
on-
okay.
I came on board first.
2004.
And when I was teaching at NPS, Juanita was teaching at Cal State.
Okay, so you were
Monterey
already
Bay.
at Cal State at that time.
Right.
Right.
And-
Oh.
Now, was that a postdoc position? or?
Actually, no, I was teaching at several universities.
Okay.
Golden Gate University,
Oh, okay.
CSU Monterey Bay,
Sure.
DeVry online
Yeah,
type
great.
courses.
So let's step back and ask a more general question, particularly for our audience who doesn't understand. Why would we need a business school at a Department of Defense organization and education area?
Okay. Well, the Department of Defense or the United States Navy, they obligate millions and millions of dollars. Look at all of the assets that the Navy has: aircraft carriers, submarines, fighter aircraft, and those have to be procured. Those have to be acquired. They have to be researched and developed and tested and produced and deployed into the field. And these are business processes.
These are all
And
business processes,
These are
huge
all
capital
business processes.
investments.
Exactly. And procurement is a critical factor of any organization's operations. We offer a defense-focused MBA program, defense-focused degree programs at the Naval Postgraduate School, because our officers, our students are supply corps officers and finance officers, contracting officers, production management officers. They need to know they need to have a defense-focused perspective of those concepts and those production areas, and they deal with industry on a daily
Sure.
basis. So we need to know the business side of industry.
Well, it's not just a regular business, but let me say this, and let me ask it in this question. We have huge capital investments in the services. Capital investments like the equivalent of building the Golden Gate Bridge, except we call them aircraft carriers,
Exactly.
or that sort of thing. How does that make the business of the Navy or the business Department of Defense different than, let's say, Ford or GM?
Well, because the dollars we spend to buy these aircraft carriers, they're taxpayer dollars.
Right.
And they come with laws and policies and statutes on how we should expend, how we should obligate taxpayer dollars. We're not a commercial company. We have to comply with statutory requirements.
Sure. Now, Juanita,
And-
do you
and-
teach in fraud? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and our goal is not in the government is not for profit like it is in industry.
Right, it's a
Our
service.
goal is to meet the mission, number one,
Mm-hmm.
and of course accountability, transparency, and the integrity of using those public funds.
And therefore, it's necessary that we give officers, both uniformed and civilians, an appreciation for that.
That's
Now,
correct.
what do you teach in the business school?
Accounting, finance, and auditing
So
courses.
is it auditing where you bring in the
Internal
fraud,
control and-
internal
yes.
controls, and that sort of thing?
Yes, sir.
Now, are you both involved in research as well?
Yes, we are. We both we've co-authored journal articles. We've co-presented at conferences.
Oh, I got to ask this question just for fun. This is off script now. Are you ready? Who drafts the first draft?
Actually, we each do our part.
Yeah.
Oh, good. So
Separately.
you do it in segments.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
She knows,
okay.
she knows the fraud part. She knows
Right.
the internal controls. That's her area. I wouldn't start to delve into that area.
Right.
I know the contracting processes. I know the acquisition process.
And
so-
then you actually put that story together.
Correct.
Great. And then you can review each other's writings.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, that's perfect. Okay. That wouldn't work well with me, but I would always have to have that lead follow author thing, but that's fantastic. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry. For your research areas.
So my research areas is an extension of my dissertation. So I created a model, a contract management maturity model, which assesses an organization's contracting processes to determine how strong are those processes.
Very similar to your dissertation interest work originally.
Exactly.
Sure.
I've assessed the Navy, I've assessed the Army, I've assessed civilian agencies as well as industry organizations, and so traditionally the focus has always been on individual training, on individual competence. When DoD identifies deficiencies in contracting, the response has always been more training to the individual, training to the workforce, the contracting workforce.
Right.
There's been lack of a focus on organizational processes.
Right.
You need to have both competent people and capable
And probable
processes
processes in place.
and effective internal controls to have proper auditability in organizations. We have a lack of auditability in our DoD organizations. A lot of it is because we don't have capable processes and we don't have effective internal controls. And those three areas, individual competence, capable processes, and effective internal controls are the legs of the auditability triangle.
And it needs to be transparent
Exactly.
in order to be that aspect as well.
Right.
So this is what your research is and what you're trying to advance. Now, how do you involve students in that work?
Thesis
Through-
work.
Right, through thesis advising. We advised a group of students. They did their thesis on the Navy Fat Leonard procurement scandal.
Oh, yeah.
And so that is a thesis. They looked at all of the alleged fraud incidents, and they analyzed those incidents by looking at fraud schemes, by looking at the contracting processes in which those fraud schemes occurred, and by looking at the internal controls that were deficient that allowed these fraud schemes to occur.
And so that we can improve those.
Exactly.
This is, unfortunately, our time's about up, but this is a great finish to this interview. The fact that we took it from what you studied, what your interests were, to actually how we're applying that in the government. So thank you very much for joining us.
Well,
thank you for being an MPS and being a married faculty member. We've definitely got the best of both worlds when we captured both
Thank
of
you.
you. Thank you for joining us at the YourTown television program, the segment sponsored by the Naval Postgraduate School Foundation, where we bring you interesting aspects of both our faculty and students and the research going on locally in your town. Join us again for another segment.